We want to do a little video on Z190s for you. This particular engine, one of the customers has decided to fit their own gearbox after breaking off the output shaft on the idler gear. So he's bought a gearbox kit from us, fitted it in, gone about 3 or 4 miles up the road, and all of a sudden it's just shredded the box and locked up. Asked us to send him another gearbox straight away, but you know, as we said to him, it's unlikely to be a failure of the gearbox, but something with the install. So he's brought the engine over in this sort of state, covered in grit and stuff. So what we discovered is the usual thing we're seeing more often now is, if you look at this plate here, this is the Selector washer that sits on the back there just to separate the gate from the actual Selector pull. And the first telltale, it's pretty bent up. And what that normally means is that they've left out either the bolt at the other end of the Selector drum, or they forgot to put the washer on, which in this case, he's forgot to put the washer on. So you get a massive amount of end float, and it can select half gears, you know, getting them jammed up, caught between each other. On the opposite end of the shift drum, there's an Allen bolt in the end here, which would have had a neutral switch on it of some sort, the contact. And what's happened is he's forgot to put it on. So look at that end float there. It actually travels more than that in certain gears. And it's just way too much end float. So it'll select half gears. And of course, eventually it'll crash the gears together, like second and fourth, etc. So, I mean, that's what it's supposed to have. Either a bolt with a thick washer, like so, which captures the end float. They only have a matter of about 15 thou. So what we're going to do in this video is just take it apart, clean everything up, and show you how to put it back together. We've taken the oil pump off, drive gear, obviously all the Selector pulls out, kickstart gears taken off so we can pull the cover off now. A bit of wiggling, push everything back as you go. Sometimes the crank will come out on this side, but we're good here. Right, there's a washer in here, you've got to make sure you keep a note of that. In on the end of the output shaft. Right, okay, what we can see here, it's done quite a special job. It's shredded everything. Actually, it's taken the gear out of here already, but you can see it's absolutely stripped that one, where it's got caught up between the two because the barrel's shifting in and out so much. It's, as I say, it's selecting half gears. We're going to clean up everything, take this all out, clean all the cases up, get rid of all the swarf and check the cases for any fractures, and then put it back together. After cleaning everything up, I noticed that the output bearing housing was ovaled, so we decided we're going to use a new case and install new bearings into that. We're going to get the cases really hot now. We don't ever knock the bearings in with a drift and a hammer. They've just got to heat the case up enough to expand it. So we're up to temp. Quick spit in there. You can hear it fizz. It's up to temp. I use a set of long nose pliers. Put the small one in first, drops down to the bottom. Do that because it doesn't steal all the heat away, and then do the second one, the larger one of the two. There we go. That's it. So we've got a cluster laid together. There's normally only one shim on a Z190, and that's between the bearing and second gear. It's a 0.5 thickness one, like so. So I've got the cluster together, just held together lightly. I've left our star on at the moment because it keeps all the dowels in. So as you can see that, and I'm going to lay that in the case. Can be a bit of a fiddle. Just getting the drum to go through, everything dropping equally. Next, we want to try and get the kickstart shaft in. Kickstart shaft has a sort of quite a meaty shim on the back there. That's the dead size of the shaft. And that goes on to stop it digging into the crankcase. We'll lay it in, we've lubricated it. Holding the shim up, lay it in gently, like so. The kickstart spring locates in the case like so. And then we can lift up and hook the spring into the pull there. Oh, that's jumped out. We've got to get it up enough and turn it at the same time to get the heel or the stop on this side of the case. Generally I put a little bit too much oil in there, so it's sort of hydraulicing itself out. There we go, that's gone in. You can see here, there's the heel stop, right there, and the spring's located there, and that's all you have to do. We can fit the crank now. The cases are still warm, so that does help us. So obviously magneto side in. There we go, straight in, followed by the gasket. Making sure you've got both the dowels in, there and there. We can actually trim that in a minute with some scissors. We've got the new bearings in, needle roller and normal ball race. On the crankcase itself, there's no shim on the crankshaft. We've taken the star off, making sure we got the thrust shim on the output shaft. There's no shim on the kickstart gear. Lay this on like so. Little wiggle as it goes. That's it. Look at your gasket line, make sure nothing's popped out. Looks good. It's really a good idea to drop just a bolt, any bolt, as long as it's long enough, in that one there, because the gasket can fall in when you're doing up the bolts from the other side. Now the case is laid on, we can flip it over to the other side. We've laid the bolts in the holes. The customer hasn't given us everything, so we're just going to bolt it up equally with what's here. Next, we're going to put in the thrust bolt in the back of the shift drum, which is that one there. This is the one he left out. Or it can be, as I say, a neutral switch as well, and that caused all of his gearbox to eat itself. So we're going to use a little bit of Loctite. Don't need much, just a tiny little dot on the end. Okay, so now we can just get it so it locks into position. Doesn't want to be massively tight, just nipped up. Put the final drive seal in next. Use a little bit of grease of some sort, just a small amount on the outside, and then we'll put some up on the splines here just to help us slide it over. And you can push it over one way and then the other just to get it over that cutout in the shaft. You can just push them in with your thumbs like so. There we go. So we've got enough end float in these. The input shaft needs about sort of 0.2 to 0.5 end float. The reason for that is it stops the clutch locking up when you do up the centre nut. And that's the thrust difference between here and here. So that's what we want there. The output shaft only has about sort of 0.1 end float to 0.2. That's normally controlled because it's not shimmed on these parts of the shaft. It's only actually shimmed within the gears. The guy doesn't want to use a kickstart, as we advise not to. So we do this kickstart delete bush, which replaces the kickstart idler gear. So we put the original shim on first, the new bush on, followed by the outer shim, and then the circlip goes on the end. Like so. Just make sure it snaps in. That one has. Now we can put in the actual selector shaft. Put some lube on that. Seal's already in on the other side. So we drop that in up to the gate, and that sits on the dowels there. Make sure you've got all the dowels in and pushed back in. And then we can fit the retainer plate. Like so. We put a new, obviously it's a new one on there, it's not bent like the original one was. Followed by the actual star itself. Like so. It's handed to which way it goes on. You can't get it wrong because the dowels are offset. So if it's round the other way, you won't get the bolt in. Dab of Loctite on the end of the thread. This one just needs a very small amount. Hold the plate back while you do it up, and the dowel's coming out. When you tighten it up, you just want to turn the drum round until it, give it a wiggle until it actually locks on something, like so. Generally it'll be at the end of the stop, and then a small tighten, there we are. We'll pop the selector pull in next. So get the heel of the spring round there. Get it started as it pulls itself up. And then we can just push either with this tool, spring back a bit as it goes. Do it up. That's in and in place, and we can just check that the gears are all there. So at the moment, let's get it round to first. To rotate the input shaft as we go. So we've got first gear, neutral, second, third, fourth, and fifth. So all feels good. We'll go back down the box quickly to neutral so we can send it to him. You do have to keep rocking the shaft to get it to select, because it normally have the output shaft turning as well from the back wheel. There we go, into neutral. So this engine we're not putting together completely, the customer's going to do that. Normally there'd be a heel plate on here for the disengagement of the kickstart gears, but obviously we haven't got that, and he's got the delete idle gear, so he doesn't need to put that back in. He's got to put his oil pump on, drive gear, etc., clutch, and then obviously the cover. So the idea of this video was just to give you an idea about how the selector drum is crucial to everything of how the gearbox works. To say that it's not a failure, this guy really did think it was a failure of the product, not of anything that he'd done. But in fact, you know, as we could see, it was just by having the Allen bolt in the end of the drum. It allowed the drum just to go travel as much as it wanted to, causing it to crash the gears. And we're seeing it more and more now, where people are sort of, you know, like this video, using YouTube to get an idea of how to do it, but taking or missing things out. But we've seen this now probably about 8 or 9 times where it's just shredded second gear completely just due to the shift drum. And it's dangerous really, because it can lock the bike up and spit you off. So you've really got to, you know, get some professional advice when you're putting these things together, because it, you know, can go really wrong. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and it is a very basic one, but it gives you a rough idea of what you've got to get up to.